Hi, welcome to Father John's coffee break. This is coffee break number 11. So, a young fella, the teenager, long hair, way down. So he went to the father and says, "Dad, can I borrow the car?" And the father says, "When you get your hair cut?" And the young lad thought, and he says, "Jesus had long hair." And he says, "Yeah, and he walked everywhere too." And so that reminded me of a story of Pat Travers, Father Pat Travers, the principal at Damien. And one day he's walking across the campus and a car pulls in late and 3 students in it. So he says, "Why are you late?" And they said, "We had a flat tire." So he says, "Come with me." So he took him into an empty classroom, spread them out, gave them a piece of paper. "Now, which tire was flat?" Busted. They were at Starbucks. And so so what I'm talking about today is the why are there 4 Gospels? Now, if we start that in London one time, there was a meeting and of all the eminent thinkers and philosophers from Europe, and they were meeting in London, and the main speaker was Karl Popper, and he was going to make an analysis of Wittgenstein's philosophy. And so during his delivery, he was criticizing Wittgenstein, who was there, and at one stage Wittgenstein jumped up, grabbed a poker, waved it in the air, and stormed out. And so the next day, this was reported in the papers, and and surprisingly, no 2 stories tallied. They were very, very different. Some said it was a red-hot poker. Some said he threatened him with the poker, that he swore, that he shouted things, and he stormed out. And he did. He stormed out and went back to Dublin. And so these were some of the greatest philosophers and brains of Europe, and yet the stories are very different. Why is that? So because each of us see things from our own perspective. We each have presuppositions and we see things in a different perspective. And the gospel writers, they see Jesus in a different perspective, in a different theology. They're writing, what they're presenting is who Jesus is for them. And so Matthew, so he's a Jew, and he's writing for Jews, and so he's trying to show that Jesus is the new Moses, and he models his work on the Pentateuch. Pentateuch has 5 books, and the Gospel of Matthew is divided into 5 books also. And so Jesus is the new Moses. He's the new Moses who goes up the mountain and delivers the new law, the Beatitudes, and the Sermon on the Mount there. And so he's the new Moses leading people to the new Israel. And so he explains many of the Jewish terms and what they do. And Matthew's Gospel became known as the Catechism Gospel, because it was used for converts to explain to converts many of the Jewish practices and what they did. Mark is the gospel on the go, if you like. He was writing for a general Roman audience, and it was dictated by Peter to Mark. Well, Peter was in prison, and so it's got that impetus of Peter. He's the one who rushes in all the time, and so it's it's got that, go in his gospel. And what he's trying to show is that Jesus' power is a person of power by God. And so Mark is the gospel that has more miracles than anywhere else. He's showing the power of God, and that this power of God is working through Jesus, and he's going to lead us to salvation. Luke is different. Luke is a Greek, and he's writing mainly for Greek converts. And so he's writing in a different way. And in the Greek culture, women have a totally different role than in the Hebrew community. And so Luke always pairs a story with a man with the story of a woman. And it's called Luke's pairings. And one of the greatest example is where Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. Now, in the East, you see, one of the big mistakes we all make with reading the Bible, we think it's Western literature. It's not, it's Eastern literature. And it's a different mindset than the Greco-Roman mindset. And so what they try to do is paint pictures. And so the picture there is the master and disciple. So what Luke is saying, by painting that picture of Mary and Jesus, is that Jesus accepts the women disciples. That was totally radical, totally revolutionary, because no rabbi would even talk to a woman, let alone accept a woman as a disciple. And so Luke is a compilation of eyewitness reports, that he doesn't claim to be an eyewitness himself, but that he's gathered together all these eyewitness reports to show that what happened to Jesus and that he's leading us to salvation. And of course, Luke continues that the Holy Spirit takes the message to the heart of the evil empire, which is Rome. And that's why Peter and Paul both end up in Rome and both lose their lives there. So John, on the other hand, John, on the other hand, is an eyewitness. He's the only one who is an actual eyewitness. And his gospel has little details the others don't have because they weren't eyewitnesses. But John's theology soars above the other three. The other three are called the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're called the Synoptic Gospels because synoptic mean with one eye. They're very similar. Their pattern of how the Gospels are laid out are very similar. And you have the initial ministry, but right in the center of each Gospel is the question at Caesarea Philippi: who do people say I am? And from that point, Jesus' face is set to Jerusalem, and he heads to Jerusalem. So John, on the other hand, he begins right in the very beginning. Even that's how he begins his gospel, in the beginning. And that's how Genesis began, in the beginning. And John's gospel, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And through him, everything came to be. And so the Word is present right at the beginning of creation. And so his pre-existence goes back to the beginning of the world. And so and then the Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. That's a very, very important statement, because the Jews, although they'd returned from exile from Babylon and rebuilt the temple and everything, they still felt they were in exile because God was not dwelling with them. And so the incarnation, the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. It's the end of the exile. And Jesus is here to lift us up and to take us home, take us home to the Father, to lift us up. And much of John's gospel is about lifting up. Jesus comes into the world and everything is lifted up. And so the wedding feast of Cana, people drink water, the ordinary drink of people. But then the celebration, it's raised to the level of wine. And then at the Last Supper, he raises the wine again to the blood of the new covenant. And so John's gospel, it soars higher. And that's why many old churches, if you look at the pulpits in very old churches, it's always an eagle. And on the wings of the eagle, the book is placed, the Bible is placed. Because John soars above the others. And the eagle is the symbol of John. And so everything is being raised up. And we are being raised up. And so he no longer calls us the friends, but we're brothers and sisters with him. And so we're raised up, and through the cross, we were brought to the Father. And so four very different works. Now, why were they written? Well, they got to a stage, because it's in the mid-60s that the first gospel starts being written. And it's because the first eyewitnesses, those first eyewitnesses are beginning to die out. And so the community thought, we have to get this down on paper to preserve it. And so that's what the impetus was for writing the four Gospels. And so they start committing it to paper. Interestingly enough, just as the pen was being put to the paper for the first time, Paul was having his head cut off. So Paul never read a gospel. He never saw a gospel. And so it's an interesting facet. So so we have the four gospels, but we are writing a gospel ourselves. Each day we write a gospel. By how we go out to people, how we treat people. So are we, writing the gospel of Christ or some other gospel? And so the way we act as Christians is a gospel. And you have to remember that sometimes the only gospel that some people will read is you or me. How we live our lives as Christian. That's the only gospel they're ever going to read or see. And so Martin Luther King, he had a pithy little saying, which really sums it up. And it says, every day you write a gospel by what you do and what you say. What gospel do you write today? By what you do and what you say.